A boot crushed the dry earth like it had something to prove. Dust rose and faded into the hot air. In the distance, vultures circled over a silent field that once echoed with the sound of hooves and men yelling orders. But now the wind was the only law left. A figure stepped forward, coat torn, hat low, and a silver badge tucked half into his belt. He looked over what remained of a legacy too stubborn to die. This wasn't just a return. This was a warning. It had been 5 long years since the Dutton name vanished from the headlines. Some said they were all gone. Others believed they had simply gone underground. The truth? The Yellowstone ranch still stood, but not the same. Its gates were locked, its fields empty, and its barns taken over by the government. What once was? A family empire had now become something colder, a federal outpost. Marshal Eli McGraw wasn't looking to inherit anyone's legacy. He was sent here on orders. A former cowboy turned federal enforcer, Eli didn't care about bloodlines or family feuds. He cared about law, and this land had none left. When he arrived, the locals watched from behind curtains and half-shut doors. Some feared him, others hated him. But no one welcomed him. Yellowstone had changed, and not for the better. The town just outside the ranch was dry and broken. Bars were quieter, churches were more full. A new sheriff sat in the old station, but no one listened to him. Cartels had started whispering through the hills. Land brokers sniffed around, offering money for acres. And worse, an old enemy of the Duttons was back, this time wearing a tie instead of spurs. His name was Silas Creed. He once rode against the Duttons. Now he sat in the governor's chair with a smile that meant danger, but the land remembered. And so did Jo Dutton. She returned under cover of night. A young woman now, full-grown and sharp-eyed. She wasn't here to take back her grandfather's chair. She was here for answers. She found Eli at the edge of the ranch, inspecting a torn fence. He turned to her, and for a moment it was like 2 storms met. "I don't care about the name," Eli said, "but I need someone who knows the bones of this land." Jo looked past him, toward the barn that once held generations of pride. "Then you need me." From that day, the land began to shift. With Jo's knowledge and Eli's badge, they started digging not just into the soil, but into secrets buried deep. Old allies returned quietly. One by one they stepped forward. A horse trainer who owed Jo Dutton his life. A ranch hand with scars and a memory too long. Even Rip's old notebook found its way back. And then came the night of the fire. A warning was sent. The barn Jo's father's old place lit up like a beacon. The sky turned orange, and the town woke in silence. No screams, no sirens, just the smell of revenge, but Jo didn't flinch. She stood in front of the flames, her boots steady in the dirt. "They want war," she said to Eli. "Let's remind them who taught this land how to fight." As smoke rose over Yellowstone, something began to rise with it. Not just resistance, something older, fiercer. The name may have faded from the gates, but the fight was still in the ground. And as the new Marshal and the last Dutton stood side by side, a legacy that was never meant to end began again, with fire in its eyes and a badge on its chest. The peace didn't last long. 3 days after the barn fire, a body turned up on the edge of the Yellowstone border. No ID, no phone, just a note pinned to his chest that read, "No Marshal, no Dutton, no more." The message was clear. Jo and Eli weren't welcome. But neither of them were the type to leave when threatened. Especially not Jo. She'd already lost too much to walk away now. Tension started to crack through the valley like dry branches under boot. Local ranchers, once loyal to the Dutton name, were being pushed off their land by shady buyers offering too good to be true money. The offers came with smiles during the day, but at night, fences were cut, cattle went missing, and warnings were carved into wooden doors. Eli found himself standing between 2 kinds of law, the one he swore to protect, and the one the land still remembered, old justice. Rough, fast, and unforgiving, inside the Marshal station, formerly Rip Wheeler's bunkhouse, Eli kept records, maps, threats. He noticed something strange. The attacks weren't random. Every ranch hit, every fence broken, Every scare tactic at all traced a circle around the Yellowstone. It wasn't an accident. Someone was trying to isolate the land, choke it off. But why? That question got darker when Jo found her grandfather's old journal hidden under a floorboard in the ranch house. The pages were torn, blood-stained in. Some parts, but one line stood out, written in thick black ink. If the land falls, they take the West with it. Jo stared at that sentence for hours. It wasn't just family pride. Jo Dutton had seen something coming, something bigger than feuds or land disputes. And now, that storm was here. Meanwhile, in the governor's mansion, Silas Creed sat in a leather chair, his smile stretched wide as reports came in. "Send more men," he ordered. "If they want to play marshal, we'll show them who writes." The laws now, his men weren't wearing badges. They weren't trained in justice. They were trained in control. Ex-soldiers, hired guns, government shadows. And they didn't come to protect. They came to claim. The town began to split. Some sided with the Marshals. Others sided with Creed's new vision for Montana, one built on oil, deals, and silence. Churches warned their flocks to stay neutral. Bars became whisper halls. And the old train station, once a dumping ground for Dutton justice, was found empty with blood on the floor. Jo knew the Dutton name was both shield and target. But Eli, he started to feel something strange in himself, too. The law he carried on his chest started to feel heavier. This wasn't about enforcing rules anymore. This was survival. Conflict wasn't coming. It was already here, and at the heart of it was one question no one wanted to answer. What happens when the land remembers the blood spilled on it and starts asking for more? Asterisk, they thought the Dutton story was finished. Buried beneath dirt, dust, and history, but real legacies don't die. They wait. It started small. A black horse tied to the Yellowstone gate one morning, with a single word burned into the wood. Still here. No one claimed it, but every rancher who passed. That sign paused, touched their hat, and rode on without a word. Something was moving in the land. A shift, a quiet rise. Jo didn't wear the Dutton name on her sleeve, but in her bones. She began walking the old fields again, speaking to the people her family once protected, the ones who remembered the old days, good and bad. An old woman handed her a box one night, her father's hat, faded, bent, familiar. Jo didn't speak. She just placed it on her head, and the silence felt like thunder. Meanwhile, Eli was changing too. The badge hadn't changed its shine, but something in him had gone darker. He stopped asking questions and started watching eyes. He no longer waited for orders, he gave them. The kind of orders Jo Dutton might have whispered in the dark when word spread that Silas Creed's men had bought out the sheriff. Jo and Eli rode into the station with 2 horses and one warning. They didn't raise their voices. They didn't need to. The next day, the sheriff resigned, and every deputy wearing Creed's colors was gone by sunset. The ranchers began returning. Not all, but enough, one by one. Fence posts were fixed. Herds moved in the night. An old branding fire was lit again, not for cattle, but for something older. A symbol of unity scorched into a piece of barnwood, the Y. It wasn't just a ranch anymore. It was a base, but with fire comes smoke. And that smoke reached Silas Creed. He didn't react with anger. He reacted with calculation. He sent word. If they want the past, give it to them. All of it. The next night, 3 graves were dug near the old corral. Fresh, shallow, no names. Just a metal post in each one with a Dutton family brand crossed out in red paint. It wasn't a warning. It was a declaration. Jo stared at the graves, her jaw tight. "They think this will scare us," she whispered. Eli looked down, quiet, then replied, "No, they're hoping we break first." But the land had already chosen? Old Eli's came back from silence, a half-blind ex-rancher who once rode with Case, a native tracker who'd made peace with Jo Dutton in another lifetime. Even a former oil tycoon who lost everything to Silas and now sought redemption. They brought more than memory. They brought firepower, grit, and purpose. And when the sun rose over Yellowstone the next morning, the flag flying over the ranch wasn't federal. It was stitched from scraps, faded denim, blood-stained leather. But in the center, bold and raw, was the why. The legacy had returned, not in name but in action. And it wasn't asking for permission anymore. It was taking the land back inch by bloody inch. The land was no longer quiet, not in the wind, not in the soil, not in the eyes of the people walking it. Every fence post now held a story. Every hoof print in the dust carried the weight of old blood, and the silence, it had turned into something louder than a scream. The night before it began, Jo stood alone at the old Dutton barn, where her grandfather once ruled a kingdom carved out of dirt and defiance. She lit a match, the flame trembling in the wind, and whispered, "I forgive you. But I'm not you." Then she dropped the match. The barn didn't burn as a symbol of loss. It burned as a funeral for the past and a signal to the enemies circling like vultures that the next chapter wouldn't be quiet. By sunrise, Eli was already in the saddle. Across the ridge, black trucks rolled in. Silas Creed's private force badges. Bought, not earned, soldiers in name, vultures in spirit. They weren't coming to negotiate. They were coming to end the story, erase the land, bury the name Dutton once and for all. But Yellowstone had one last breath left. Jo stood on the front porch. Rifle in hand, Eli flanked her. Behind them, ranchers, rebels, misfits, every forgotten soul the Duttons once touched. No uniforms, just grit and loyalty. They didn't plan speeches. They didn't plan mercy. Then the sound broke. Gunfire cracked like thunder. Horses screamed. Dust erupted into the sky like smoke from a dying god. Eli fired first. Jo didn't miss. And behind them the ranchers moved like ghosts, fast, brutal, quiet. In the chaos, Creed's men realized something they hadn't expected. They weren't fighting just a family. They were fighting a belief that the land can't be bought, that blood makes history, but spirit makes legacy. And that even in ashes, some names burn brighter. Jo kicked open the governor's hideout door by midnight. She wasn't bleeding, but someone else was. And when Creed saw her face, he knew. "You should have killed the name when you had the chance," she said. He tried to speak. She didn't let him die, and by dawn, the state's flags were lowered to half-mast. Not for Creed, for the land, for every man and woman who had bled for something real. For every promise broken and now finally paid. The final shot of the trailer isn't a gun. It's Jo, standing on the ranch hill, a child at her side, looking out over a land that's no longer stolen. Eli rides off into the horizon, alone, silent, unapologetic. The Dutton name isn't said. It doesn't need to be, because the Y on the gate now stands for something more.